Good morning and welcome to the Wilson Center. My name is Abe Denmark. I direct the Asia program, and today's event is the latest installment of the center's Hindsight Up Front initiative, which is examining the implications of recent events in Afghanistan for its people, the region, and for the United States. We have already hosted events with General David Petraeus, former National Security Advisor H.R. McMaster, and prominent voices from India and Pakistan. We also have videos and podcasts exploring different aspects of this issue, including a recent edition of the Canon X podcast exploring the complicated legacy between the United States and Russia in Afghanistan. Today we'll be discussing the implications of recent events in Afghanistan for China and Russia, two major powers with significant interests in Afghanistan and increasingly competitive dynamics with the United States. Contributing to this discussion will be Alexei Davidov, a research fellow at the Primakov National Research Institute of World Economy and International Relations at the Russian Academy of Sciences, Lu Yang, a resident scholar at the Carnegie Tsinghua Center for Global Policy, and Nilofar Saki, Director of Policy and Diplomacy at McCollum Company. Each speaker will be asked to provide 4 or 5 minutes of opening remarks, after which we will delve into a discussion. You in the audience can submit questions to our speakers by emailing asia@wilsoncenter.org or on the Twitter handle @AsiaProgram. To kick things off, I'm delighted to welcome the President and CEO of the Wilson Center, Ambassador Mark Green, for some opening remarks.
Great. Thanks, Abe, and welcome everyone to the Wilson Center. You know, some 50 years ago, Congress launched the Wilson Center and our mission of, in their words, strengthening the fruitful relation between the world of learning and the world of public affairs. These days, our political landscape, including our foreign policy landscape, too easily gives way to posturing and spin. Our goal is to draw objective lessons, the world of learning. Our challenge is to draw those lessons in real time, because I think, as we all know, history is being written a little more quickly these days, and nowhere is that more true than Afghanistan and the region. I hope you'll take a moment to visit the Wilson Center website, where you can find our earlier episodes. As Abe referred to, our discussions with General David Petraeus and former MI6 Chief Sir John Scarlett and former National Security Advisor H.R. McMaster. Our most recent effort looked at the withdrawal's implications for South Asia, and it featured prominent experts from Pakistan and India, as well as former U.S. Ambassador to Pakistan, David Hale, a Wilson Center scholar. Our website also hosts a treasure trove of scholarship on Afghanistan and the surrounding region and the history of American foreign policy there. Today's event is a worthy addition to that series, and it looks at the implications for and from China and Russia. A couple of thoughts to set the stage. On August 30th, the UN Security Council passed a resolution calling for the Taliban to facilitate safe passage for those wanting to leave Afghanistan, to allow humanitarian safe access to the country, to uphold human rights, especially for women and children. But China and Russia abstained. Why? As part of the withdrawal, countries like the US, UK, Germany, Norway, Australia, and others closed their embassies in Kabul. But China and Russia have kept theirs open. Why, and what does that mean for the years ahead? We have much to discuss, and we have much to learn. I want to thank our speakers for joining us today. We really do appreciate it. And now, Abe, let's get things going.
Thank you so much, Ambassador Green. We'll now kick things off. We'll get things started with initial comments from Alexei Davidov from IMMO.
First of all, I would like to thank the organizers for hosting this event. I express my sincere condolences to my American colleagues with regard to tomorrow's anniversary of tragic events of 9/11. My name is Alexei Davidov. I am a research fellow at IMMO. I study US foreign policy in the Middle East, Central and South Asia. In my consideration, the exit of US troops from Afghanistan is a big game changer for the long-term trends that we see unfolding in Eurasia. And due to that specific reason, I consider this meeting especially important. Afghanistan is located directly near the borders of Russian Federation and China, and it affects sensible topics of extremism and terrorism expansion. Today, Taliban has direct control over Afghan borders and has the real leverage to affect the trends that might affect the future of Central Asia. First of all, Tajikistan and Kyrgyzstan are Russian allies. They are members of Collective Security Treaty Organization, and under Article 7 of its charter, Russia and other member states are to protect each other from external dangers. Then, for the last 20 years, himself, first of all, as a militia or anti-governmental force. The fact that they now control the country presents a totally new challenge for them, whether they will have the capacity to govern properly, to tackle the problems of social and economic development. These will become their primal priorities, because otherwise, without popular approval, they will not be seen by foreign parties as a party to negotiate, and they will not gain external and internal stabilization. Depending on its policies, the experiment of Taliban of building an Islamic state might become a shining example for other radical movements. Bearing this in mind, it is quite possible that Taliban will manipulate external parties by offering some promises to stabilize the current disturbing trends, or by threatening to export these trends in the nearby region. In this regard, the fact that the United States and their allies left the country without leaving an official framework for political transition created a vacuum of conflict management there. This vacuum presents not only a challenge for Eurasian states, but also an opportunity to cooperate and prove their capacity to deal with this conflict. For example, Shanghai Cooperation Organization includes all main parties that can affect the security situation in Eurasia. From my point of view, this creates an opportunity for cooperation between Eurasian states on the one side and Western states on the other side. Today, Russian experts and political community criticizes the way the US withdrawal was implemented. There is no need to be an expert to see that Washington didn't expect how quickly the Kabul government will fall, which led to a completely disorganized rescue operation of their Afghan allies. I'm absolutely sure that while giving his April speech, Joe Biden didn't expect that the day of 20th anniversary might be the day of inauguration of Taliban government. But only further steps of this administration will make it clear whether it has the will to cooperate with regional powers to solve the Afghan crisis. In the near-term future, I see at least two steps that we could make in order to see whether such East-West cooperation is possible. First, members of the Security Council of the United Nations could design a resolution that would show a unified approach towards the future of Afghanistan. In my view, designing a joint roadmap to stimulate a specific behavior of Taliban in the international arena could stimulate the prospects for further great power confrontation on this topic, and therefore lead to the de-escalation of terrorist activity in the AFPAC region. Russia, China, the United States, and their allies could apply a model of negotiation they used to design the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action in order to draw the red lines for the regime. Second, there is a fertile ground for cooperation to organize a multilateral mechanism to provide the Afghan people with direct humanitarian aid. There should be not a situation when there is only one corridor of distributor of international aid, since it could undermine the prospects of social and stability and peace. I believe that we, as representatives of our expert communities, could jointly formulate our vision on future cooperation rather than confrontation between our states, because only this could finally end the crisis in Afghanistan. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Alexei. Let's turn now to Liang from the Carnegie Tsinghua Center. Would you unmute yourself, please?
thank you very much for the invitation of Wilson Center. I'm very happy to participate in this conversation on the recent development on Afghanistan and its implications for China. China has been very prudent since the development of the whole Afghanistan issues. And now, after the takeover of the Taliban, now China is actually very careful to see how the situation will further develop. There's challenges as well as opportunities for China. First, China is closely look at the security development in the region. The insecurity and instability in Afghanistan could spill over into the region, and these will also affect the Chinese citizens and Chinese investments in the region. The security concerns in the region, it's a very obvious. But if we talk about China and Afghanistan, although China is a direct neighbor of Afghanistan, but the Wakhan corridor between China, that connect China and Afghanistan is actually quite inaccessible. This is why even the security and instability in Afghanistan would not affect China's interior, for example, the Xinjiang security situations very much. However, I know that China have the investment in the region, for example, in CPEC, and also China has also the investments in Central Asia. And if there's the terrorists and extremists come over again, and the refugee questions could not be solved properly in the regions, the instability in the regions will actually affect China's security interests as well. And secondly, if we look at the economic issue, China has some investments in Afghanistan over these years, but due to the instability and in the security issues and very poor infrastructure in Afghanistan, the investments is in fact not very successful. For example, Ajak copper mine and the Amu Darya oil field. And this is why these times, although on the social medias, there's lots of hype on Afghanistan issues, but Chinese government still tell for example, the business communities that we should be very prudent in investing in Afghanistan. And China's actually from Afghanistan side, it's also quite hope that China can give the economic aid. But China would do that only when Taliban can stabilize the domestic stabilize its domestic situation and stabilize its power, and when it can guarantee the security of Chinese investment. This is why it will be a wait and see process, as well as for the international recognition. China wants to see that Taliban will have an inclusive government, and it's also expect that it can deal with all the terrorist groups without differences. And this is China's approach. And Afghanistan issues have become a very important things now in China's bilateral and multilateral relations. And China, as a big powers in the region, and also the big powers that playing in Afghanistan, and it's the direct neighbor of Afghanistan. And this is why China should also play as a responsible countries in the region. Due to the China's past history in Afghanistan, actually China is quite neutral, and it could be accepted by all parties in Afghanistan. And this is why in China, there's also voices that China should do a constructive interventions in Afghanistan. First of or it's because of the security interest. And second, because of it should play as responsible power in the world. And third, it is also a very important opportunity for China to step in to show that it can deal with it in a multilateral way. In general, the Afghanistan issue is not so important for China in its diplomacy, but its security issue is not so important, because we talk about Afghanistan as a graveyard of all the empires, but currently the big power competitions is more about economic growth, it's more about technological innovations. Afghanistan it will play a role, but it will be more as for China as a multilateral platform to engaging with the country, engaging with the regions. But it's not like a way that it will have a more economic influences in places like Afghanistan. So geopolitical reasons is no more so important like technological innovations and economic growth for the big power competitions. And thank you very much. This is my reactions for these questions. Thank you.
谢谢. Thank you, Professor Liu. And now we'll turn to Professor Saki for your opening remarks.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Denmark, and thank you, the Wilson Center, for having me here. Good morning to everyone. Good evening, and good afternoon to those joining us from other parts of the world. But let me, let me a little bit talk about the geopolitical dynamics in the region, and what, in terms of from IR perspective, what new changes we will see or expect going forward. But the U.S. withdrawal and Taliban return to power, it will certainly change the geopolitical dynamics and the regional architecture in the region. And it will also provide Russia and China opportunities to expand their influence in the region and also project their power. And in the context of great power politics, Afghanistan will once again be utilized to serve the interests of the regional power here in the current context. And of course, this regional power, both China and Russia, they have their particular interests. One is purely focused on the Russia interest, purely focused on the security. It's a security interest, and on the other hand, China has both relevantly, I mean, it is both economic and security interests that China has. From last 2.5 years, when this so-called peace process or the political process where the Taliban started, China has continuously criticized the United States for the withdrawal, but also remained a comparatively silent actor during most of the political processes that happened from last 2.5 years. On the other hand, if you see the Russia role, Russia was kind of an active player in the region, reached out to the Taliban a certain time, and also convened the regional dialogues on Afghanistan processes, political processes. So there's one analysis that China remains silent, but what I would see that China did not remain silent. China had its influence through Pakistan, Pakistan is a close partner, economic and strategic partner with China. So China was there, has been there, but through another actor, Pakistan, mostly, and Russia has had a direct engagement and involvement in the recent political processes that ended up in the Taliban's takeover power. So with that, both Russia and China opposed the Islamic Emirate. In certain events, actually, they clearly said that, including Iran, all this regional power, they clearly indicated opposed actually the Islamic Emirate. It is, as others mentioned, they are still in the wait and see processes in order to recognize this current Islamic Emirate or no. I'm going to come back to there, that who's going to, at least based on my analysis, who's going to recognize it first. Now, going forward, both Russia and China will have a very close policy of engagement with the Taliban, very close. I would see also Iran, the three of them would have very close policy of engagement. Why? There are some reasons that I would like to highlight here. First, Russia, of course, as a near neighbor of Afghanistan, like other neighbors, is concerned about the evolving situation in Afghanistan that would capture or involve the security threats, the threats from radicalized groups, the drug trafficking. So there are three areas that Russia has been concerned historically and now also at this particular time with the insurgency inside Afghanistan, or potential for more insurgency inside Afghanistan. Russia would see that as a threat. And by the way, Russia had an experience in Afghanistan in the 1980s and especially the experience with these radicalized groups. So Russia is more concerned about the security at this particular time. And we have seen that it already expanded its presence. Russia already expanded its presence in Central Asian countries. With the Taliban's takeover of Kabul, Russia had held military exercises in Uzbekistan and Tajikistan and put hundreds of armed vehicles, artillery pieces, and at the border with Tajikistan to actually shield the Central Asia from potential threats and the threats of violence from next door, from Afghanistan. So that is, going forward, that would be the major interest of Russia, and try to impede or prevent any kind of threats that it will have from next door. So that makes Russia to have a closer relationship with Taliban, any deal making, or to have the assurances, security assurances at first stage. Also in terms of Taliban's government, Russia seems to be in favor of the inclusive government, because Russia has an experience in Afghanistan. Russia knows that authoritative system would actually cause another insurgent groups to emerge from Afghanistan. That will create fragmentation within the country. An authoritative system further open doors for pockets of insurgency to emerge across the country, and that pockets of insurgency would threaten the security of Russia. So therefore, Russia would really, would see an inclusive government would benefit Russia's interest. The Russia overall will also get closer with Pakistan going forward, because Russia would see Pakistan as another significant major actor in the region, and getting more close to Russia means getting more security assurances from the Taliban going forward, practically and pragmatically speaking. So more engagement with Pakistan and more engagement with Taliban, and also push for inclusive government. This will be the three very practical move by the Russia. I'm going to come back to this great the regional politics later, but especially during question and answer session. Now I'd like to start talking about China. So China, of course, the very significant interest of China in the region is economic interest, and Afghanistan can pose both threat and opportunity for this particular interest of China. China also has two rivals in the region, that's India and Russia. Going forward, if China preferred to have its expansion, economic interest and strategic interest in the region, China might use Taliban to again reduce or mitigate especially reduce the influence of Russia and India in the region. But it depends really how actors will play a role. But at this particular time, China will certainly is concerned about the security, because as other friends mentioned here, it had a huge investment through CIPIC, the close to $50 billion project that captures infrastructure, that captures the power plants, pipelines, transport infrastructure, and many more, several projects in Pakistan. And the insurgency or terrorism could have impact in Afghanistan, could have serious impact on these major projects that China started in Pakistan. Though there has been a number of attacks also in Balochistan and some other parts on some of these projects by the insurgent groups mostly. So therefore, China's concern is, first of all, to protect and preserve this project from further terrorist attacks. And on the other hand, China, of course, would like to, the feasibility, the business feasibility in Afghanistan is very much focused, make China focus on the opportunities that exist. And those opportunities inside Afghanistan are extraction of mines. That China used to be partially involved in it in the past, but did not complete those projects. So the extraction of mines, that would be another interest if security allows, if also China has a kind of assurances from the Taliban or deal making with the Taliban to start and invest on that particular sector that China has shown interest in the past, and I would see China involvement also more going forward in that particular sector. Now, China. So these are the particular interests that China has. Now going back to Russia. Russia will align its interest with China at this particular time, though the interest might change from international relation perspective. Allies will not remain allies. All kinds of partnership and allies building, especially among the regional powers or global powers, or regional powers in such a context, in secure context, is temporary. So for the time being, Russia will align its interest with China. And both China and Russia, I would see, will use diplomatic and economic inducements to pursue the Taliban and build further relationship with them for their business interests. And it's all around the business interests of these two countries. And again, I should also mention that all these relationships and cooperations will be temporary tactics to serve the particular interests of these two powers. And with that, they are on one hand, we could say that they are in the wait and see mood, both Russia and China, in order to see how the security shapes in Afghanistan and what will happen with the Taliban government. But on the other hand, I would see that they will be the first to recognize any Taliban government because of the interest, the major interest that they have, and the threats that they have, they foresee from Afghanistan. So they might be the they may be actually the first to recognize any form of a government formed by the Taliban. I stop here and then I'll continue during question and answer session. Thank you.
Thank you, and thanks to each of you for very interesting opening remarks. We have exactly 30 minutes for a question and answer session. We have several questions that have already been submitted, but for you watching live, you can submit questions still over email, asia@wilsoncenter.org, or over Twitter to the handle @AsiaProgram. The first question that I'd like to ask is actually building off of some comments that Alexei made regarding working through the United Nations to enhance cooperation between East and West, between these different geopolitical actors. To me, it again emphasized one of the questions that Ambassador Green raised during his opening remarks, noting that the UN Security Council passed a resolution calling for the Taliban to facilitate safe passage for those wanting to leave Afghanistan, to allow humanitarian safe access to the country, to uphold human rights, especially for women and children. Yet China and Russia abstained from that resolution. So my question for everybody on the panel, really, but maybe Alexei could start, is that if the UN represents a good opportunity for the world's major powers to cooperate, why did China and Russia abstain on something that to me at least seems like a pretty non-controversial set of goals in the UN Security Council? Alexei, do you want to start with that?
Yeah, thank you for the question. Well, I'm not, as you can see, a representative for our government. I cannot say regarding the motivation why they voted, why they abstained the vote, but at least they didn't vote against it. And this might be a signal that both parties are open for discussion. And in my view, I read the resolution. It's more a declaratory resolution rather than a resolution or a document that has a specific plan of action. It doesn't provide a common view from all the parties. What should we do regarding these crises? And that is why I mentioned the JCPOA agreement. I think that we have to engage in process of dialogue to acquaint such an understanding, a joint understanding between the United States, their allies, Russia, India, China, and etc. That's my point of view.
Thank you. Luyang, do you have any comments to add?
I quite agree with the view of Alex. This is both China and Russia did not against it. And I think in terms of multilateral platform engaging on Afghanistan issue, there are still some China's positions and Russia's positions in many issues with regard to the UN resolution. They are more independent. But at least on Afghanistan, all the players now hope to have a stable situation, a stable government in Afghanistan. But how things will develop, we're still needs to see whether Taliban could be a reliable partner. And these UN resolutions not only need the dialogues and arrangements from big powers, but also needs a lot of initiative. So for the countries in the regions, because they are the direct stakeholder, for example, Tajikistan or Turkmenistan, Pakistan, Iran, and China and Russia. So most of them are direct neighbor of Afghanistan, and And this is why I think, so we will have different kinds of multilateral platform to talk with in the UN resolutions, in the UN framework, in China, America, and Afghanistan and Russia, in these quadrilateral or regional platform to talk about these issues and find the solutions either for the humanitarian and economic aid as well as for the refugee issues.
Thank you. And Professor Saki, do you have anything to add on this?
Well, yeah, I have slightly a different take on multilateral platforms. Yes, on economic, to address economic crisis, that it's the, I mean, when we talk about the transnational threats, there are traditional threats and non-traditional threats. So the multilateral platforms, looking particularly at this particular time, could address the non-traditional threats that Afghanistan could pose and bring all these countries in the region with the regional power to create a roadmap to address some of those non-traditional threats that Afghanistan could pose, as we see the humanitarian crisis, economic crisis, drug trafficking, and many more that comes under this environmental crisis that comes under this non-traditional threats. In terms of traditional threats, I mean, looking at the history of these multilateral platforms convened around Afghanistan topic in the past hasn't been so effective. It has played a very soft role in bringing and talking about the interests of this particular regional players and then addressing those interests. Therefore, UN is seen as a soft platform and a platform to address the non-traditional threats, but not really traditional threats. So, I mean, I'm not saying that shouldn't happen. That is a good move, again, to address some of those non-traditional threats. But for traditional threats, I think that's not a good way to move forward. There is need for more engagement of the players with one another, especially the regional players. And I would see all play a role. I mean, going forward, we will see the role of India, we will see the role of Iran, and we will see the Russia and China's take about their engagement with these particular countries. And Pakistan, which is emerging actually as a player, a major player now in the region. And that would also change the architecture and the engagement of this power with Pakistan. So this requires more than a regional platform organized or convened by the UN. That requires more real politics in place. And therefore, I would envision that some in the region might recognize a form of a government, a Taliban form of government, in order to create a space for that type of interest-based talks or deal making with the groups in the region.
Thank you all for that. I wanted to follow up on some comments that have been made throughout each presentation about the nature of the new Taliban regime in Afghanistan. Lu Yang has talked a lot about taking a wait and see approach. There's been discussion and mention of seeking security assurances from the Taliban, working with the Taliban to try to prevent the spread of radicalization. But I wanted to ask each of you your sense, can we actually, if the Taliban were to provide security assurances, is that something we could actually trust? And I'd note that in the interim government that was just announced, the interim Taliban-controlled government, the acting interior minister, the named acting interior minister is Sirajuddin Haqqani, a leader in the Haqqani network, whose father founded the network, who has a $10 million bounty on his head, who's led attacks in Afghanistan against American facilities, Afghan facilities, Indian facilities, responsible for the deaths of hundreds of people. And now he's in charge of police in Afghanistan. So considering his role and other members of extremist groups in the Taliban government, how do we engage with this government? How do we seek assurances from them that can be at all relied upon or taken seriously?
I'll start with this, Mr. Denmark, and well, it's a very critical time in terms of the regional countries' move going forward with the Taliban. And getting back to your question, it's difficult to trust Taliban, especially with the form of government they put in place. They did initially said that they will have an inclusive government, and by inclusivity, what was expected that it would be inclusive of various political factions, inclusive of different ethnic groups, inclusive of women also. So that meant inclusivity from many aspects, and inclusivity of inclusion of ideologies, different other ideologies. That would, give a good picture to the or frame or face to the Taliban, whatever government they were intending to put in place. But the current form of cabinet that they presented recently, that is, first of all, yes, as you mentioned, there are some wanted people on the list. That is problematic. That's critical. And on the other hand, with that, I foresee another level of fragmentation in the country. And by fragmentation, I mean the pockets of resistance emerging from different parts of the country that would dismantle the security inside Afghanistan. Forget about the region, right? And if that pockets of insurgency emerge, pockets of resistance emerge, there is chances of insurgency to take shape within Afghanistan, and that the regional actors might take side of different factions in Afghanistan going forward for their own security assurances. So that will actually, this authoritative or this form of a government that Taliban has announced, that's a recipe for not for any kind of a peaceful solution or stability in the country and region, but that is a form of further de-stability both in the country and Afghanistan. And as I mentioned, that will engage the regional countries, and that will actually make them take sides, whoever arise and emerge as a form of insurgent groups or different factions going forward. So that will involve the regional countries to take sides of those political factions or resistance or name it, whatever, insurgents, however they take shape in future. And that will also, again, destabilize the region. So that, in a nutshell, I wouldn't see that as a recipe of stability. That is a recipe of destability, both in the country and the region. So and recognizing Afghanistan, recognizing Taliban government, I think would be a mistake, especially this current cabinet that they have formed and the current government that they want recognition for it. Though they mentioned that it's an interim one, it's not a permanent one. But therefore, recognizing Taliban at this particular time is a mistake. And I think the regional players should not be fast or quick in taking that decision at this particular time, because the security assurances that all these regional players are looking for, that is difficult to gain from such a system in place. And by the way, on the other hand, Taliban did promise Chinese that they will not interfere in their internal affairs, and they will have some level of they will have security assurances that they will not target, they will not support the insurgency in China, they will not actually put any kind of threats or pose any kinds of threats to China. But it's hard to trust because Taliban are in the consolidating power phase. And yes, they do need recognition and money at this particular time, and their statements should be one must be highly skeptical about any statement they make at this particular time.
Thank you. Any additional comments, Liang?
Yes, I
Davidoff?
can address add some to these questions. I think in China, people, so scholars and the governments are also not very convinced about the ability of Taliban to govern, and it's also quite worried about easy erupt if the movements does not accommodate all the interests it needs to. But we should also notice that fragmentation of Afghanistan, it's because of the geopolitical competitions in the region. It's because of the fragmentations in the regions. For example, the Afghanistan issue, it's reflected the competitions and complications between Pakistan and India in South Asia. It's reflected Russia and other Central Asian countries. And it also reflected the ties and complications between Saudi Arabia and Iran. So this is why all these factions, they can find some ties with their some ties in the region as well as beyond the region. But I think at these points, we see the takeover of Kabul. It's in a quite a peaceful way, and there is also some more neutral forces within the within Taliban. This is why I think it also needs to give them some time and also some opportunities. If we say cut all the ties, cut all the humanitarian assistance and economic aid, that will push that will set these neutral voices or in a very difficult way. And this is why I think so part of and why Taliban will have this shift. I think this is also because the people in Afghanistan is tired of all this turbulence and they want peace. And at this point, this is something that people want to do. And international societies, communities should give them a chance.
I agree with
Please.
both the previous speakers. I think that recognizing Taliban government right now, would be a mistake if any country does that today. We have to understand that Taliban is a product of internal civil war that has been happening for a long time in Afghanistan. And in this regard, we have to give the people of Afghanistan the chance to come to a specific conclusion. How do they want to develop? What kind of model they want to adjust for their future? And in this regard, the international community should specifically be patient to see how this process is unfolding. But at the same time, I think that it is crucial to have a formulated position regarding what is acceptable, and what is not, what behavior is acceptable and what behavior is not. That's it.
Thank you to you all. We have 11 minutes left. We've received many questions over from our audience, and I'm always impressed with the audience that we get. We have questions from U.S. government officials, from scholars in the United States, scholars in Asia. There's of these, though, there's two questions I really wanted to make sure we have time for. So I'd ask the panelists if they could keep their responses a bit brief. The first question actually comes from several people have asked about this, but is first asked by my colleague, Matt Rajansky, who is the director of the Kennan Institute at the Wilson Center that Alexei knows quite well, asking about the role of Central Asian states like Tajikistan and Uzbekistan. We've seen reports of increased Russian and Chinese military and police or border security troops in Tajikistan. There was a recent meeting between the Indian National Security Advisor Ajit Doval and his Russian counterpart Nikolai Patrushev, in which India and Russia agreed to work together to build a firewall defending Central Asian republics bordering Afghanistan from spillover of Islamic radicalization, as they described it. How do you see the potential for Russia and China to cooperate in Central Asia? And as some have noted, is there a potential for increased Chinese involvement in Central Asia to maybe raise some concerns in Russia about the more sort of underlying competitive dynamics between those two countries? Alexei, do you want to jump on that first?
Okay, I'll start. From my position, there is already some mechanisms within Shanghai Cooperation organizations to fight terrorism and radical extremism threats. And now, from my point of view, Afghan crisis is the first major crisis for this organization, and therefore those countries who are in the Central Asia, Russia, China, other member states of Shanghai Cooperation Organization, they all have the opportunity to show the potential of this organization, of how it might be, how we might build a dialogue within this organization to deal with them. That's for example, one example of how we could cooperate.
Thank you. For Liu Yang, the additional wrinkle for this is how do you believe China is reacting or would react to Russia inviting and supporting Indian involvement in Central Asia, considering the competitive dynamics that have existed for a long time between China and India?
Yeah, actually, just from my point of view, Shanghai Cooperation Organization this time did not play a much role in coordinating all these issues so far, as I know from the discussions within Chinese scholars. And this is why the platform is there, but the difficulties are between Pakistan and India within the Shanghai Cooperation Organizations make these issues so cannot addressed properly within the organization. But I don't know whether in future these situation could be changed, and China will be very careful in engaging all these. So for example, they will have these cooperations with Russia and with India with regard to Afghanistan. Actually, China and India had some good experience of cooperation in Afghanistan with short-term projects, but because of the recent border standoff and also the Taliban takeover, these process has been interrupted. But I think in future, especially Russia will play a positive role between China and India. And these three countries could still cooperate in Afghanistan issue, just separated them from the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, which means China, India, China, India, Russia in this trilateral dialogue, they could play a much positive role. And China, Pakistan, Russia, they could also form a kind of trilateral platform for that. This is why I know there's some platforms, but there are so many platforms, multilateral platforms, but we still need to see that which could address the issue more effectively due to the difficulties of relationship within the region.
Just to add on what was said before, I think India at this particular time is really concerned. With the Taliban in power, India is concerned about its own security and the threats that the Taliban regime or government can pose to them. Now, but India does not have a choice except to engage, and as mentioned before, through any platform that could be effective and addressing all those interests and bringing these countries together for a common goal in the region, and that is their own security first. So therefore, it is an interesting time also in terms of region to see how these dynamics will shape and who will side with who going forward, and how the Taliban and how they will react with the Taliban, especially if in terms of recognition, who will recognize first, and then that recognition set a stage for further engagement and knowing better who will side and ally with who in the region for the common goals. So that, and as mentioned before, I quite agree that it's good to observe all these multilateral platforms which will take shape going forward, and how the new there's a Taliban as a new actor in the region would be treated in this particular platforms.
Thank you. And so the last question I'd like to ask, and we'll go in reverse order from our opening panel. So Professor Saki, Professor Liu, Professor Davidov. One of the questions that we've received multiple versions of over the past hour reflects some of the debate that's been happening in the United States since we've been leaving in Afghanistan, which is the implications of this for US competition with China and Russia. Specifically, the implications of our withdrawal, our inability to establish a sustainable, self-sustaining government in Afghanistan, the implications of that for perceptions of American power, perceptions of American capability, especially in China and in Russia. So I'd like to ask each of you, and this question comes from a member of a staff from the United States Senator. If we could talk a bit about how these events in Afghanistan have impacted perceptions of American power and American reliability, especially in Beijing and Moscow, and if you see this as having any impact in the competitive dynamics, the potential for conflict between major powers going forward. Professor Saki, if we could start with you, please.
So overall, there are kind of a negative impression about the U.S. withdrawal, the management of withdrawal, and the withdrawal also, the timing of the withdrawal. Though there are also observation that the timing of the withdrawal or the whole concept of withdrawal was there from President Obama's time. So it's nothing new. I mean, the announcement of the time was nothing new. There was always a talk about the withdrawal and the deadlines. But there are very negative impressions and observation about how the withdrawal happened and about the management of the withdrawal as well, which has created a lot of questions on the United States managing the withdrawal itself. Now, that comes about the role of the United States going forward. I think both Russia and China play their hard to to just reduce the influence of the United States in the region. And it comes under the great power politics and competition, and the strategic competition that they have with the United States. Both of these countries will certainly would try to undermine the whole notion of withdrawal and the whole process of withdrawal in the region, just to undermine the US credibility in the region and globally as well. And as China said several times, has critiqued actually a lot the US withdrawal, and the Chinese used irresponsible, the term they used was irresponsible withdrawal. So by all those diplomatic statements, what could make it out that both countries are well certainly going forward, try to keep that narrative of in order to undermine the credibility of the United States. Now, what the United States can do, I think the disengagement of US from the region, that's not a good strategy going forward. United States should be engaged, as we have seen statements coming here from DC that US will be engaged through diplomatic and economic related initiatives and activities and strategies going forward. I think that should exceed, that should keep on, and the US should do more of that. The disengagement will undermine US credibility further, and the disengagement would, I mean, in long term, could pose serious security threats also from the newly emerged terrorist group or insurgent groups in the region, if there will be a bad scenario that some of us have been assessing that. So the disengagement would have a security threats for the US in the long term, and the disengagement will have also a credibility issue that undermine the US credibility globally. So engaging with the region and engagement in the region further to also, I mean, counter-terrorism efforts, not only development and economic and activities, but also the counter-terrorism efforts. I think US should focus on that and try to engage further through different platforms with the region. Thank you.
Thank you. Lu Yang.
Thank you. So from my point of view, I think, yes, these withdrawal undermined U.S. credibilities, especially through the way of how U.S. managed the withdrawal. As Professor Saki has mentioned, we have been talking about withdrawal for so many years, but it comes so suddenly that in a short time, that Afghanistan has occupied all the cover stories of major medias. I think this is not only in the world, but this is also the same in China. But I think China has actually benefits from these. So in the past 20 years, so United States has also played a crucial role in keeping these to stabilize the region. Although at the end it seems it's not so successful, but U.S. has taken its efforts, and China also like to cooperated in the past, and China also cooperated with the United States in future. So the thing is that we should think about some new ways to dealing with Afghanistan, because we see that in the past, the old way of dealing with it's not so successful, and we should think about what are our mistakes and what we can give them more opportunities, because anyway at this time, the Taliban also takes some kinds of nationalist approach to try to accommodate the different interests within Afghanistan. We don't know whether it will be successful or not, but at least there are some signs that the Taliban is trying. So with regards to China's position, so Afghanistan's in the past is not so important for China. So either economic or the security issues, because and China is, and I think in Chinese, to say it properly, so the Chinese interest in Afghanistan is actually not that strong, because they don't think that influences in a geopolitical influence in Afghanistan will benefit China a lot. And you see the history in the past, so all the major powers, they are defeated in Afghanistan. This is why I would say that China would like to play a neutral role and cooperate with all stakeholders within the region and beyond the region. And the United States will keep its ties in the regions, and it will also maybe US should find a new way to engage in. And I think stability in the region, will benefit all parties. Thank you.
Thank you. Alexei.
Yeah, I agree with both previous speakers. In my mind, the implementation of withdrawal happened in a very bad manner. And as you know, Russian views of the withdrawal are very critical and not complementary. Therefore, in my mind, a complete disengagement of the United States from the process will be most likely interpreted as if these catastrophic events were part of the plan. And in this regard, I think that the best position to restore any kind of reputation would be to engage in a multilateral dialogue, how to solve, how to deal with the current situation, what we have now. And therefore, all major parties should be involved in order to control these trends.
Well, thank you all very much for your answers. Thank you for your participation. It's been a terrific discussion, and we very much look forward to working with all of you again on these and other issues. For those of you watching, you can watch other events. You can see all the other pieces that the Wilson Center has done on Afghanistan by going to the website wilsoncenter.org/Afghanistan. And with that, we'll close the event. Thank you all very much for tuning in. And until next time, we'll see you soon.